KETV Newswatch 7, chronicling the stories impacting our community. Stories making a difference. Stories that matter to you. This is KETV Newswatch 7's Chronicle.
We're looking to address three areas specifically. E3, education, entrepreneurship, and emerging technologies. We're looking to create a high-wage human capital pool so that people don't have to work 2 or 3 jobs in order to be able to support their families.
That is just one of the areas Ian McKale thinks Omaha needs to focus on in the future, a future where he's running the city as the next mayor of Omaha. Good morning, everyone. I'm Rob McCartney. This is KETV Newswatch 7's Chronicle. Today, the third of 5 shows that we're dedicating to Omaha's mayor's race and the upcoming primary April 4th. Between now and then, we'll talk with each of the men and women running: Christopher Geary, Taylor Royal, Ian McKale, Heath Mello, and Gene Stothert. Final show will air 9 days before you vote, and all the chronicles with the candidates will be online at ketv.com. All right, this morning we're talking with Ian McKale. First, I want to give you a few facts about him. According to his website, he grew up in poverty on the north side of Omaha in the Miller Park neighborhood. He actually witnessed his father die as a result of gun violence when he was only 4 years old. At 15, McKale became the national spokesperson for the National Mentoring Partnership. Went to high school at Central, and after graduating, became the youngest person at the time to intern for Nebraska Senator Ben Nelson. McKale then went to Howard University, graduated law school from the University of Nebraska. He worked for a year at the Urban League of Nebraska as a youth program coordinator, and then he followed his heart by becoming an entrepreneur. Now, last August, we caught up with McKale, who founded the Infinite 8 Institute. He was with some Tuskegee Airmen starting one of the first drone training programs in the metro. The goal is to get minority teens interested in this new type of flying.
So we first started working with low-income youth, conducting a drone program at the Bryant Center off of 24th and Lake in North Omaha. And through that interaction, we saw young boys and girls that had an enthusiasm for the technology.
And that love of technology is evident when you talk with McKale. We were there as he kicked off his mayoral campaign last month at his new office near 20th and Lake. He's also an author and a social entrepreneur and inventor. McKale says one of his focuses will be finding a good intersection between business and technology.
We're also looking to diversify into other sectors such as virtual reality, augmented reality, diversify further into 3D printing and other areas that will provide our young people a competitive edge as they compete globally in this new economy.
And joining me now to talk more about that and much more is Ian McKale. Thanks very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Appreciate it for having me.
All right. Now, first off, why'd you decide to run?
Well, I believe that I'm the best person for the job. I think right now our country is at a unique juncture, and either we're going to keep pushing the pedal to the metal and going over the edge, or we can take some steps back and think about what it was that made this country great to begin with and start to re-implement some of those same ideologies.
Right. Some people say when you say take a step back, though, it might throw up a little warning flag to them. They say, we want to go, we want to go, we want to go. How do you convince them that's a good thing?
Well, for example, I think right now with the way that our economy is set up, where consumption is extremely high, and we have a very large national debt as well, I think that when you put your foot on that pedal and you go off of a cliff, there's no coming back from that. And so how do we become a nation? How do we become a city that's fiscally responsible? How do we become a nation of doers and creators as opposed to just memorization and regurgitation, which is prominent in our current educational system? And so I believe that we had founding fathers that were very intelligent individuals that created a country and did their best to get it right. And I think we've kind of veered away from that path.
Right. So what do you think are the biggest issues facing the city right now?
I think some of the biggest issues, one, I think is poverty. Poverty is very, very huge right now across the country, and in particular here in Omaha. You have 4 out of 5 Americans that are on the brink of deep poverty. And so everyone, or a lot of people, generally are 1 or 2 paychecks away from poverty, one medical bill, any type of unexpected incident. And also here in the city of Omaha, we have one of the highest numbers of working poor in the country. And that goes across demographics and ethnic backgrounds. And so poverty is a huge issue. I believe that that transcends into the whole issue of violence. Right now, the criminal justice system is having some hardships with the whole Tecumseh situation and the riot that was there at the prison. I believe that we need to address violence from a preventative standpoint. Instead of being reactionary and going up to the hospital and sending people there, why not reach out to these young people before they actually go off the cliff and help them take a step back and to really think about their future and what it is that they have in front of them in order to be able to take advantage of. And I think that my story is something that resonates with that concept as well.
Yeah, and that story is, I want to ask you about that. You saw your father killed.
Yes.
What happened and what has been the impact, do you think, on you? Because you were young at the time.
Absolutely. It was a situation where there was a domestic dispute between my mother and my father. My father at the time was a very prominent member in the community. He helped found the Midlands Bar Association with Brennan Council. And so, it was an unfortunate thing that occurred. Watching that and experiencing that, it made me think about life differently. It made me think about how fragile life is and not to take any moment for granted. And so whenever it is that I'm particularly seeking to accomplish any of my goals or anything that I aspire to accomplish, I understand that life is short. And so, don't waste time, get it done, because you never know when life could be taken from you.
Right. And so what happened? I mean, you said it was a domestic situation. You were what, 4
yes.
at the time?
I was 4. My mother and my father got into it. And, everyone was outside when the incident happened. My father was trying to remove me from the home. And, like any mother who would want to protect their child, it ended up snowballing into an incident where, my mother shot and killed my father. And, like I said, being exposed to that, it gave me the ability to empathize with a lot of the community, especially in North and South Omaha, who have relatives or friends and family that have been killed as a result of gun violence. But also, seeing something like that is the worst thing that could probably happen to a person. And being able to bounce back from that and to take that situation, something negative, and turning it into something positive, I think has really been the story of my life. And so looking at the city of Omaha, we have negatives and positives on both sides. Right. And so how do we take the good things and make them better? And then how do we make the areas where we're lacking, how do we bolster those areas up and really get them up to speed with the rest of the city? And
that is the question that we keep trying to answer. Let me ask you about public safety in Omaha. Do you think Omaha's a safe city?
I think that it depends where you live in the city. As I've gone around the city and I've knocked on doors and spoken with citizens throughout the metro area, there are places where people do feel more relaxed. When I open up a door to knock, there are many places where there aren't locked doors. When you go to the north and the south side of the city, there are a lot of locked doors. There's a lot of apprehension and anxiety as you maybe walk up on your neighbor, et cetera. But I understand, living in a community or growing up in the Miller Park area where we had drive-bys on a regular basis. We knew people that were shot or had been killed. And so I understand and I empathize with that situation. And I think that in order to really change that scenario in that narrative, it's going to take someone that has come from that community, that is able to articulate on behalf of the residents. But also, my family has been in Omaha about 4 or 5 generations. And so, a lot of my family are around. Sometimes I see a relative's name pop up on the news for good or for ill. And so, I can make phone calls and I can have connections with the community that, just to be honest, no other candidate probably would be able to do.
Gotcha. And you said one of the keys, one of the solutions to, or not necessarily a solution, but helping fight back on this violence is education, is fighting the poverty, as you mentioned. Let's talk about money. One of the big issues right now, property taxes. You think tax is too high?
Yes, I think that what has happened is that to a certain extent, government has become lazy. And I think that government needs to figure out how to better manage its own funds, and then at the same time, figure out how it as an entity can create new revenue streams as opposed to just either annexing new areas of the city or just raising property taxes. Hardworking people, they pay enough, right, for all kinds of things from health care to property taxes, et cetera. But how can government do a better job about lessening that burden on your average person and really holding up its own end of the bargain?
So what's your plan then? I mean, how does government improve?
So one of the main things that needs to happen is new streams of revenue. Yeah. And so what we've proposed is the Green Plan. And with the Green Plan, it's essentially an acronym for green zones, for rail or light rail, for electric energy, and also for net zero buildings. And with green zones, essentially we will designate zones through the master plan, areas that are going to have LEED certified and living building certifications, which are the highest green certifications in the world. Also places where they're serving organic food, juice bars, things of that nature. And so we want to be able to create a healthy population, a population that also is transitioning away from some of the other energies that are not renewable. From a light rail situation, one of the things that has been a hot topic has been the electric car,
right.
and really bringing that to the TD Ameritrade downtown and Midtown area. But that's about $150 million project. And according to studies that have been done as early as 2010, a light rail from here all the way to Lincoln in front of Memorial Stadium, that will cost half of what it will cost that streetcar. And you think about the jobs that it would create, because it would attract talent straight from UNL to employers here in the metropolitan area. Also at the same time, a lot of people back and forth would be able to work not only in Omaha, they could work in Lincoln. You know, we have bad weather here in Nebraska. A lot of traffic fatalities happen on the road between here and Lincoln every year. And so how can we address that and be able to revitalize our community and bring in talent from other places?
That would be interesting, because that idea had been proposed, I don't know, it's probably 20 some years ago, between, connecting to it. It comes up every once in a while, and it'd be interesting to see if they'd actually, do you think the climate now is better for something like that to happen?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you have people who are discussing creating a $150 million project that isn't going to take anyone more than a couple miles throughout the city, I mean, that's really not a solution to the transportation issue that we face. If we had a light rail that would start from downtown and that would go throughout the city, have stops, also go to Nebraska Crossing, and then be able to stop on, some of the smaller towns throughout the city, it would help revitalize those smaller towns. It would help with commerce as well. And so I think the fact that that has come up and we have a better alternative that has a lot of research that's already gone into it, I think that, our friends in Lincoln also wouldn't be upset about it either.
Restaurant tax, what's your thought on that? Would you keep it? Some people have said they would take it down incrementally, get rid of it altogether. What would you do?
To be honest, I'd be open to feedback from the restaurant community. From my experience currently, from people that I know that have restaurants or are in the business, they just accept it as a cost of doing business. And I haven't really seen a lot of people who have complained on the level that they have about property taxes as far as with the restaurant tax. I do understand why Stothert may have campaigned on the platform of doing away with the restaurant tax. It brings in a lot of revenue. But as we utilize things such as electric energy in order to change our entire municipal fleet of cars into electric cars, and also bringing solar wind turbines here within city limits. With those two, from the assessments and what it is that we've researched, we'd be able to save taxpayers $20 million a year. That's $200 million over a decade, and that's $500 million or $1 billion actually over 50 years. And so by making small changes like that in order to help us progress and also at the same time relieving the burden among your average citizens and taxpayers, we would have money to be able to fix the streets and to bolster up our police and our firefighters, and also at the same time to be able to make our schools better. And so there are things that are readily available to us. We just have to peel back some of the layers and be able to get the job done.
All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break right now. We're going to continue our conversation with mayoral candidate Ian McKale when KATV News Watch 7's Commitment 2017 Chronicle continues. You're watching KATV News Watch 7's Chronicle, and joining this morning is mayoral candidate Ian McKale. And I want to ask you, I mean, you're a big proponent of entrepreneurship. How does that play? How would that play, and how important would that be in a McKale administration?
It would be a focal point. The fact that I have been so involved over the past few years with the entrepreneurial community here in the greater Omaha area, there have been a lot of conversations amongst my peers about how we can actually make the entrepreneurial community more vibrant. One of the areas that we want to focus on as far as entrepreneurs is access to capital. As far as other areas or other demographics and municipalities that are of similar sizes throughout the region and around the country, Omaha gives out or actually invests one of the least out of any other city. And so, you know, rich dad, poor dad, we have to invest in ourselves first. We have to pay ourselves first before we go out and spend our money on other things such as streetcars. And so we have to invest in the entrepreneurial community. Fortune 500 companies aren't going to just fall out the sky and just land every day. If you think about like a Snapchat that recently IPO'd, they were homegrown. They were a small organization that had investment, and they grew to become a large corporation like they are now. Back in the day, used to have organizations or entities that were owned privately by families, and they'd be around for 150, 200 years, and it took that long for them to get there. But today, with the rapid pace of innovation and technology, you know, you can have a Facebook in 5 to 10 years.
You mentioned Snapchat. I mean, it was founded by, I think, a 26-year-old, or he's 26 now, and young talent, and you're 30. I mean, how do you what's your plan to keep young people excited about and in Omaha?
Well, you have to do things big, and you have to follow through. And as long as you integrate young people and young talent into the process, they can buy into it because you're not selling them a false dream. Being the spokesperson of the National Mentoring Partnership at the age of 15, you know, I experienced being young and being around a lot of powerful people and influencers. And I was able to learn from them. I was able to take a lot of that information back and to readily utilize it. And one of the things that we would do is focus on making sure that we had young people with brilliant ideas that would be a part of our administration.
Gotcha. Perennial problem or a perennial issue for mayors, and people I know want to know this from you. What would you do about potholes and snow plowing?
Well, as part of our green plan and all the different cost savings that we'd be able to accrue, that $1 billion over 50 years, we could put a lot of that money aside to be able to focus on repairing the streets.
Okay. You also mentioned something, a citizen investment fund. What is that and how vital is it?
And so I came up with the idea while I was conducting a drone, commercial drone seminar, and we asked people at the end of the class what their ideas were as far as how commercial drones could be utilized in their workplace, in their communities, and they came up with brilliant ideas. And I realized, you know, a lot of these ideas don't filter up. And, you know, we have all this talent and all these people that have these different experiences that can contribute to make this city better. And so the Citizens Investment Fund is a fund where we're going to invest at least $100,000 into innovative ideas that come from the community that either save us money as a municipality or provide different streams of revenue.
Okay. Let me ask you this. Do you liken yourself to any public figure or political figure, or who would you most closely associate yourself with?
I'd say I wouldn't liken myself to any other figure. I think that as far as comparisons, I think there's a comparison with Barack Obama. As the former president of Students for Barack Obama at Howard University, our first meeting, there were 3 members. A lot of people didn't think that Obama had a chance. And as soon as he won Iowa, everything changed. And similarly, as soon as we were able to get on the ballot and become a viable candidate, I think that our situation here will change, and I think the people and the voters will realize that as well.
And get your name out there more on it. Would you annex more parts of the city? And that's an issue that's pretty hot right now. Yeah,
actually, I wouldn't right now. I think that our resources as a municipality are really stretched thin. The last numbers that I saw from last year's annexation, Stothert planned on saving $70 million annually, and actually ended up costing the city $75 million. And so that plan didn't really work out. I think, like we said, we need to focus on making sure that we can build up what we do have. And then also, it was just interesting that a lot of people on Section 8, a lot of low-income individuals are essentially sent to these subdivisions not knowing that they're going to lose voter rights as well. And so I think that that needs to be something that could be addressed. Instead of sending people to subdivisions, how do we fill up the inner city that's decaying and that's decrepit in order to make this place a place that's vibrant and not a place that looks like it's dying or dead?
All right. Well, we're going to be right back with some final thoughts. First, I want to remind you always that your comments are an important part of the show. If you want to be heard, you can email those comments to news@ketv.com. Tell us what you think about Ian McKale, his campaign. Remember, we want to hear from you, and we'll be right back. This is KETV News Watch 7's Chronicle. For the past 30 minutes, we've been talking with Ian McKale, who wants to be the next mayor of Omaha. Don't have a lot of time left, but we want to give you a minute to make a final pitch, if you will, to the voters.
So once again, my name is Ian McKale. I'm a IBM global entrepreneur, as well as an author, an attorney, and a commercial drone pilot. And our campaign platform is E3. We're focusing on education, entrepreneurship, and emerging technologies, creating more high-paying jobs so working class people don't have to work 2 or 3 jobs to feed their family. Also addressing the violence in the criminal justice system so we don't have overcrowding of our prisons and riots like the Tecumseh incident. And also lowering property taxes, making sure that government is doing a better job of being fiscally responsible and making sure that government is pulling its own weight. On top of that, we're going to do 3 other things. We're going to bring the city together. We're also going to stop making excuses for the inadequacies of government. And also, we're going to make sure that we focus on the people. And in order for our city to be as great as it can be, we have to be sure that we make progress and that we can change. And the logo and the slogan of our campaign is Be the Change. And so we hope that through your vote that you'll make that change.
All right. Ian McKale, thanks very much for being with us this morning. In the next 2 weeks, we're going to be talking with the final 2 candidates running for mayor. We'll have those shows, this one and the ones we did with Taylor Royal and Christopher Geary. They're all online. They'll all be online at ketv.com. Look for the Chronicle tab on our homepage by clicking on the menu bar. Don't forget, primary is April 4th. The deadline to make sure you're registered to vote is this Friday, March 17th. First date you can vote early is Monday, March 20th. All right, I'm Rob McCartney. Thanks for watching. We'll see you back here next Sunday morning for KETV News Watch 7's Chronicle.